Thank you for that generous uh, introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. I'm pleased to join you today. I'm joining you from Portland, Oregon, where it's quite early. I'm sitting here in my home office with a stiff cup of coffee so I can be awake and with you. I'm thrilled to talk to you about one of my favorite topics. The Intercultural Communications Institute is a small nonprofit that has been dedicated for over 40 years to helping people work well across cultural differences. We run a summer institute, have a master's degree, an extensive library, and several sets of events, including a large event in the summer called the Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication. I run an assessment institute where people call me literally from all over the world, from every sector of the economy, and ask me, how am I going to get my leaders ready? Will my team be able to do these things in different cultural contexts? How do I know that all my students are good global citizens? And my job is to work with those organizations and agencies to work out how they're going to assess and grow the competencies that are most appropriate for their needs. I'm thrilled to share with you one of my favorite topics tonight, Global Ready. So what we're going to do is discuss a little bit about what is global leadership and why it is needed. It's an important thing to lay down. And we'll talk about the different types of competencies that you might want to consider, whether or not you own them, and and where they rest in your own aptitudes. The values that often people engage across cultural differences and things you want to be aware of. And finally, some aspects of how you might grow these. I'm purposely focusing this webinar on how you personally might situate yourself as a global leader. Some of you, I'm aware, may be in a role of a coach or a trainer in growing others. And for you, I ask you to think about how you yourself would support others or how your agency might support them. But I'm going to focus on the individual for this particular presentation. What we know is that interculturally competent leaders are in high demand and short supply. There's urgency, limited time, limited budgets, yet high unclear expectations and conflicting agendas about how it is that we go about engaging effectively across culture around this world. There's often information gaps and inertia and political agendas that make it difficult for us to move forward. What we want to be aware of is that demands of being addressed with old paradigms and ways of learning, linear training, limited time frames, and self-preservation are not ways that are going to take us forward. There's been some serious study about this work, one recently by Mercer Delta of 223 senior executives from large corporations across 17 industrial sectors and 44 countries, found that the majority of business executives believe their companies face leadership shortages to meet the future of global business risks, and they're threatening their corporate performance. Approximately 50% of senior managers in Fortune 500 are expected to retire in the next 5 years. And recently, the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, a big growing economy, surveyed 274 US-based companies with operations in China and found that the #1 business challenge in China was human resource constraints, including attracting and retaining managers and workers. In the survey, 43% of the respondents said the issue of recruiting capable Chinese managers had strong negative impact on their business operations in China. Just one example, the types of things that we're up against. In The Economist, they did a survey and they found that in terms of the issues that global leaders are facing once they're in the role, they say that cultural or national conflicts, 50% of them are challenges for them to work effectively. Understanding the local culture is a challenge for 40% of people in these roles. And working with different styles and norms is also a challenge for 42% of people who identify as global leaders. So we can see there's high need. When I'm discussing culture, very broadly, it's the shared values and assumptions of specific groups of people seen in their personal values, attitudes, norms, behaviors, and artifacts. It provides for us a sense of identity, belongingness, pride, safety, in-group and out-group, efficiency, predictability, and smooth function. These are the things that we want to think about when we're talking about culture. Broadly, when we're talking about a competency, we're looking at the underlying characteristics of an individual or team that can be shown to predict effective, superior performance in a job or situation. Another way to paraphrase, to phrase that would be the capacity that exists in a person that leads to behaviors that meet a job demand within the parameter of an organizational environment. Global leadership broadly is the process of influencing the thinking, attitudes, and behaviors of a global community to work together synergistically towards a common vision and goals. This is complex work. We want to really think about what it is we're doing when we start engaging global employees and global clients. There's been considerable research done about this work. And over 50 studies have been looking at what global leadership effectiveness and what influences it. Many of these competencies overlap and are often separated into different labels given to them by their researchers. And that it's a very multi-dimension construct as we're going into this work. What I'm going to try to do today is provide you some mapping. So you want to think about yourself as a map and where it is you want to go in engaging your global clients or global employees, and see where you situate yourself so you understand how you orient yourself here. Frequently, when we do this work, we look at different ways to look at the knowledge, the culture, and the context of the territory that we're hoping to engage. But an important way is also to look at the skills that you're going to engage across the cultures. What is your personal toolkit? One of the ways that I often ask people to think about this work is gaining perspective on yourself. Self-knowledge is very impactful in this context. And I use the metaphor of going to a good tailor. Many of us have gone to an inexpensive store and picked out a suit of clothes very inexpensively in a tiny booth with a little mirror. And because it was inexpensive, we didn't put much thought into it. But when we're buying a very fine suit or a very special gown, we go to a tailor and we step up on a stool, and there's a set of mirrors all the way around us, a 360. And we're asked to stand up there and pivot and really see ourselves fully. This is the type of work that global leaders want to engage. They want to really take time to get that 360 perspective on themselves. For those of you who see yourselves as trainers or coaches, you want to think about how you could act as a tailor and offer insights to that person being fitted. There are building blocks to growing these competencies. And this is a pyramid model built by colleagues of mine, Dr. Bird and Osland. We need global knowledge. We need to know how the world is moving and what the politics and the geography, languages, etc., that are around the world. That helps us get an orientation to the work we're about to engage. But that has to be built upon. The threshold traits are things like integrity, humility, very important to be humble here, inquisitive, you gotta really want to learn about these differences, and resilience. You're going to bump into errors, and you need to be able to learn from them. Those are built on attitudes and orientations, a global mindset. How is it that other people orient themselves? Cognitive complexity. Can I hold different value sets simultaneously in behaviors and go, not the way that I would do this, but I understand where you're coming from? Cosmopolitanism. That ability to think about, this is the way the French do this. This is the way people in Saudi Arabia do. Being able to be curious and find those attitudes. Those step up into interpersonal skills, mindful communication, understanding that people communicate in very different ways around the world. There is no one way to communicate anything. Building trust and relationships with people who are culturally different. And multicultural teaming. I can't tell you how many times I get called about a team that isn't functioning. Happens all the time. It's important work. And at the very highest level, the system skills are going to be needed to be effective in this context. Leading change across cultural differences, fostering innovation, making complex ethical decisions, architecting, building community and social capital, and influencing the variety of stakeholders. This is a good schema or model for us to think about ourselves as we move into the realm of global leadership. What we want to be able to do is to engage what we call the effectiveness cycle. So in the upper left with the yellow arrow, as we enter a new negotiation or a new meeting with new clients or new employees, we want to be able to effectively analyze and decode the situation. What's going on here? How are people perceiving the situation? What do I know about them and their needs? And then we want to move to the right, to the orange arrow, and accurately identify the effective managerial action. What's going to help this team move forward and do it well? And finally, a little bit to the lower left in the blue arrow, possess the behavioral flexibility and discipline to act appropriately. You're going to have to code switch, move around, think of different ways. Different people are going to be motivated to move forward through different prompts from the global leader. And you have to be willing to take on that challenge, to do it in multiple ways. The team I have the honor of working with, they call themselves the Kozai Group, have been researching this for many years. And they did a unique thing. A lot of people who move around the world in global leadership roles don't do so well. Those placements often fail. So this team decided to look at the people who were successful and find out what it was that caused them to be successful. I like this approach. I think it's very, very worthy of replicating many other situations that we work in around the world. I'm originally from Michigan in the USA, and actually managed Henry Ford's mansion as a historical site many years ago. I'm going to use an automotive metaphor to describe this particular slide. So suppose I was a manager, an engineering manager for Ford Motor in Dearborn, Michigan. And I'd reached the top of my game there, and I was invited to move to be the director of engineering for a Ford Motor plant in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I would need a very high level of technical knowledge, expertise off to the right. I better really know how cars are made very, very well, so I can gain the respect of the people that I'm going to be leading. On the left side, I also need relevant operational knowledge. I need to do those, going back to that last slide with the pyramid, I need to do those high-level leadership skills. Very important work. However, do I know how that work gets done? And can I finesse it, particularly in the way that Ford Motor does it? Those two constructs are often how these leadership roles are chosen. They didn't necessarily always lead to success. It were the personal competencies in the middle that were the nexus of success, okay? They needed to be enacted. So the team looked deeper into what are those personal competencies. And they came up with these. The people who were successful in this work zeroed in, and they learned to learn effectively. They learned to develop and manage relationships effectively. And they learned to manage themselves effectively in challenging cross-cultural situations. The first dimension of this work they call perception management. This is the learning area. And it starts with non-judgmentalness. Am I willing to withhold or suspend negative judgments about situations and people? Followed by inquisitiveness, the disposition to look at new and different experiences as opportunity for variety, change, and learning. Tolerance of ambiguity. I was teasing a colleague just this morning, earlier last night about this. The ability to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. We don't always know exactly what's going on in the situation. We may need to sit with it for a little while and see if we can find out what's really going on. And you have to be comfortable. Most of us many people try to get to an answer a little too quickly. You have to be willing to sit with it. Again, cosmopolitanism, that interest and curiosity about foreign countries, culture, geography, as well as current and international affairs. And finally, interest flexibility, willingness to explore new interests or hobbies, to change one's normal routine. I just was working with a group of MBAs going around the world, and Portland, Oregon, where I am, is known as a food capital. People come here from all over the world to see what our chefs are making, really interesting cuisines. And so as they were going abroad, I asked my students to do a little ethnography, to research what's going on around the world. And many of them, because they were interested in food in Portland, studied the food of the places they went to. So I like to eat, I love to eat. But how is food prepared and served in other countries? Interest flexibility. The next area to consider is relationship management, that ability to make and maintain those relationships. With interest, you're looking at their interests in others, and especially those who are different. When you enter a space and there's people around, do you gravitate to the people who seem similar to you? Or do you reach out to those who might be new? Interpersonal engagement, the willingness to engage others and maintain those relationships once created. It's a real challenge. We may greet people. We may be polite at the beginning, but will we ask them to coffee, to dinner, to our home? Will we ask them to meetings and projects and really value their input? Emotional sensitivity, the capacity to read the emotions and understand the feelings of the others. Not always easy to do. Not everyone wears their emotions openly. You have to take time to learn the cultural context and be sensitive to what's appropriate in this context. Self-awareness, awareness of your own values, beliefs, strengths, limitations, and appreciating the impact of one's relationship on others. Going back to that slide with the multiple images, this is where you're taking that 360 and really looking around and saying, am I aware that I prefer a certain form of communication or a certain way of nonverbal communication? Am I aware of the value sets that I bring to a situation and how my beliefs and the ways that I engage? We don't have a camera on right here, but I'm a tall man. I've reached some maturity. I have white hair and a white beard. I have a doctorate. I pretty much personify what in my country is called white male privilege. I pretty much can have myself listened to in many, many situations, but I am aware of that. And I am aware of times when I should back off. Maybe let someone else takes the floor, okay? We have impact and we have to be aware of that. And then social flexibility, to regulate and adapt your behaviors to fit in and build the relationships. Sometimes you have to do what we call code switching. Try to do things in a different way. It's an important thing about building and maintaining those relationships. The third factor area that global leaders work on is their self-management. This is very important. Really how to understand yourself and how you manage. And they come in two blocks. The first block has to do with optimism, having a positive mental outlook toward the peoples and events of situations. To be open to the possibilities of what might happen in this new situation. You need a certain level of self-confidence in yourself and the ability to succeed through your hard work and effort. Your self-identity, the capacity to maintain your values and beliefs while being accepting of the situation and those who are different from your own. You don't necessarily want to surrender your values and beliefs and your identity, but you also don't necessarily want to cause others to feel insignificant because yours are better or different. And that very important emotional resilience. You're going to make errors when you cross difference. It's unavoidable. It's hard if you prefer not to make errors, but we do make them. So the more important thing is, are you able to cope with that and not get frustrated? Will you bounce back? Will you learn from those errors? The next block has to do with stress. Do you have a non-stress tendency? Do you have a disposition to respond with calmness to possible situations? And then stress management. Do you have a level of effective effort and strategies used to manage the stressors that you're bound to face? Global leaders have to deal with an immense amount of stress, and they have to have very, very good stress management skills. So, what I've outlined to you here so far is a set of competencies for personal management that will be leveraged with your technical management skills and your operational management skills to cause you to be a good global leader. There is an assessment tool available to you called the Global Competency Inventory, and you're welcome to contact me afterward if you're curious about it. This is not a sales session on the instrument, but you should know that it's been tested and it has a high level of reliability and validity to make sure that it works across cultures and differences. The things I like about the inventory is that even though we can pull apart all these different dimensions of yourself, we do able to show you a profile of how they come together. I like to think of this again as a metaphor of a beautiful Persian carpeting. We're able to pull apart the warp and the weave of these different competencies to see how they are, how you hold each of them. But in the end, they're all woven together to make a unique carpet that is you. And you need to know how they come together. So we show you some profiles. So as an example, people who have high scores in perception, relationship, and self-management are called globetrotters. And in their warp and weave and the way that their profile comes together, they enjoy learning about the foreign places and people. They easily make relationships with others and can manage the personal challenges quite well. Basically, the world is their backyard. They have very few limitations. As an example, another profile that may happen are for those who are called discoverers. They like to learn about and develop relationships with people who differ from them. But they don't always calculate the personal costs of these adventures and usually suffer emotionally because it's too stressful. Their self-management skills haven't been brought up to the highest levels to be able to manage these new relationships and their curiosity. There's several of these profiles. If you take the inventory, you'll see them. So this is a general warp and weave or understanding 360 of who you are and how you hold those cultural competencies. Another way, so this is a competency measure and something that I want you to consider thinking about, what you know about yourself. Another way to look at this work, a very profound way, is to look at the culturally bounded behaviors, values that you hold. And there's been good research done on this over the years. And I particularly like using the Globe Smart profile from Aperian Global. And what it does is it shows you a chart that estimates the cultures and the best information available that we have about the behaviors around the world. And it helps, it's built on the research of Hofstede, Schwartz, McRae, and Engelhardt. And there's over 700,000 profiles in the database, and there's expert anecdotal data to look at how this comes together. And what happens here is that we're able to have you take an inventory and get a diagram of you versus others. This is a really interesting perspective, and I want you to think about this carefully. The work of being an effective global leader starts with you and reaches out to others. First, you need to know you, and then having understood who you are, you're in a much better place to reach out and engage others. This is a unique way to think about this work. Many people are compelled or most curious about otherness, and they start studying different language and cultures and behaviors. That can be risky. There's a catchphrase in the field. I was just at a conference in Arizona this past weekend, and one of the fellows said it's important to understand yourself well and your own values before trying to train yourself on how to do this work with others. If you do it too thinly, if you do just a short veneer on what's supposed to be appropriate because you don't really understand, you risk the possibility of being what we call the educated fool, the person who thinks they understand the phrasing and the norms and the behaviors, but is only parroting, mimicking, child's play, and they don't do so well. So we focus on where you're at, and this is a very powerful way to do that. So what you do is we're going to get to know your own profile of how it is and learn to leverage the similarities and the gaps between yourself and others. It's a continuum. You don't necessarily have to be one way or the other. There's no right or wrong to any of these, but it's good to know what you strongly prefer. These profiles aren't your predictors of success, the competencies that we talked about earlier, but these are part of that 360 perspective that leads you to understand, this is how I like to engage the world. So, one of those dimensions is how you see the world being engaged. Do you prefer a more egalitarian, the blue area, where you're comfortable with challenging the views of your superiors, you're flexible about roles, you treat most people pretty much the same, no matter what their rank within the organization are, and you assume power and authority should be shared broadly amongst your group? At the far end of the spectrum, you might prefer a more status orientation, not to challenge those above you, to be differential to superiors, to adapt behaviors depending on your relative status within the organization. And the assumed power and authority should be reserved for the few members of a special group. It's a very different perspective. And there's a broad range from within them when you want to think about where you fall. The next dimension has to do with how you feel about risk. With risk, those who are comfortable with risk prefer rapid decision-making and quick results. They place importance on flexibility and initiative, and they value speed over thoroughness. Other people might prefer certainty. They spend a significant amount of time doing background research. They want to have proper procedures before starting a project, and they value thoroughness over speed. Again, this is a almost dichotomy, far end of the spectrum, one to the other, but there's many stages in between. Another dimension you might consider is how you prefer to communicate. Are you direct or indirect in your communication style? With direct communication style, you come to the point quickly. I talked to several people in the MBA program, and they were talking about summarizing their points 1, 2, 3. very clear, very concise. Being forthright about asking questions in most settings. Being comfortable making requests and giving directions or disagreeing with others directly. And giving negative feedback directly. That's a direct communication style. Versus the far end, with an indirect, you might spend time explaining the context before coming to the point. You might avoid asking questions in a public setting for fear of people might losing faith or respect. You might express disagreements in very subtle ways and give feedback very, very indirectly. Again, far spectrums of how this work might get done. Another valuable dimension of culture is how you get your work done. Are you task-oriented or relationship-oriented? Do you place high value in reaching your goals and objectives on schedule? Do you prioritize your accomplishments and tasks over maintaining relationships? And do you focus on what people achieve more than who they know? Conversely, if you have a strong relationship perspective, you view time-building relationships as key to achieving good results. My friend calls it go slow to go fast. You prioritize making and maintaining relationships over accomplishing the tasks on time. And you focus on people as much as what they themselves can achieve, okay? And there's a range of behaviors that you have in between. So when you take an inventory like this, you might end up with a report like this with a little zigzag of where you are. And it gives you a perspective on where they're at. And I think that's important to get that type of perspective. This is, again, a form of that 360 view up on the step stools with those mirrors. Here are 5 powerful mirrors around you as to how you view the culturally appropriate way for you to behave in the world. It's important for us to recognize that not everyone shares that same view. And so here's an example of a global team, and Daniel's the lead, but he's got participants from all over the world. And you can see that they have different ways of believing the right way, whether they're being independent or interdependent, status or egalitarian, etc. And what the global leader has to do is to know themselves and their team and understand, for example, the global lead is Daniel, and he agrees with status with his colleague Chati, okay? But he's gonna have to stretch and bend in order to engage his other team members because they're less status oriented. However, when it comes to risk, he's closer to his other team members and how comfortable he is with risk. But Chati is uncomfortable with risk. So he's going to have to think about how to bring Chati along, how to outline the appropriate steps so they don't get too nervous. Very important work. I find these perspectives really, really fascinating and a good way, a kind of a gestalt way to stop and think about this, okay? Ultimately, what we're looking at is our ability to switch the frames in our style of engagement. So this is on, this particular pendulum that we're seeing is on communication style, and our ability to switch back and forth and to bridge the gaps between ourselves and others to engage them and bring them along in our efforts, which is what leaders do. Now, can we do this? What do you want to focus on? What can you as an individual do? And if you have impact on your organization, what might your organization do to grow these global leadership competencies? One thing that you have to think about is that some of these competencies are stable, they're predispositions, and others are more dynamic. The stable predispositions are aspects of our personality. They're relatively enduring, and they can be difficult to change. And even can be changed, but they can be difficult. You may have to really focus and spend some energy on it. Others are more dynamic. They're skills and abilities that you can practice very quickly and get moving on. And they can be trainable to variable degrees. And to think about the different dimensions we've outlined and think about which ones are most trainable and which ones are going to take an immense amount of effort and coaching to get through. Here's what we know about the people who want to do this individually. It has to be self-motivated. You really need to want this. This is interesting because I teach and I train on a regular basis, and I train trainers on a regular basis and have to constantly remind them, we don't change our learners, they change themselves. We set the container, we make it possible, we offer a buffet of experiences. They have to partake of the opportunity. And it's the same with us as individuals. We have to look at the opportunities that are available to us and be motivated to take those steps. They're often characterized by crucible experiences. These are experiences that are deep and profound to us. What may be special for me, stepping off a plane in a place where English isn't spoken, walking into a room and trying to reach agreement with a group of people and from very different backgrounds, versus another situation for another person. Every one of us has our own learning edge, and we have to really think deeply about what those learning edges are and be willing to meet them. It comes through practice. This is not something you can try once, I'm going to try communicating directly or indirectly, depending on what is the one that is most challenging to me. Practice it, do it once and say, I've got it. You have to do it again and again and again, so it becomes something you really can do. And it's very experiential. Not a lot of book learning in learning to be a global leader. A lot about getting out and putting your hands in situations, meeting people, trying things, teaming, etc. And most importantly, we have to give ourselves the opportunity to step back and reflect. What just happened? What did I learn about myself? What did I learn about the others? How might I have done that differently? What did I learn from that situation? Very important to take that very important step to close the learning loop, we call it. It takes extensive cross-cultural exposure. If you have an opportunity to impact your organization, or that's your role, organizations can provide and leverage experiences by helping people join and facilitate multicultural teaming. You can look for local cultural immersions wherever possible. Study abroad or diverse field work are important ways to grow this work. Global and diverse projects that cause people to work across difference. Consider finding mentors and coaches for key people at key times. And finally, consider using behavioral pre- and post-assessments so you and your learners can understand where they're at and where they're growing. This is the developmental model that the COSI group put together, and I find it really, really profound. So on the vertical axis, we have the degree of experiential rigor. How complex is the situation? How deep into difference have we moved? And on the vertical, the lower axis, we're looking at the number and the valence, the quality of the feedback. Is it appropriate? Loops that are being provided. 20% of this work can be grown in classroom. These are in the forms of seminars, books, self-study, cultural briefings, things that we all do in training, or since I do some of my work in higher ed in classroom. 30% of this work comes from joining global teams, task force, working on global projects, doing exposure trips. You can do role plays and case analysis, cultural simulators. Language training is really important. Not necessarily going to become fluent, although you should certainly try, but at least be able to make an effort to communicate in language with the people you're learning with. That's 30% of your work. Full 50% of the work has to do with your exposure, working deeply with difference. These could be in the form of strategic international business travel, participating in global assessment centers, planned field experiences, sophisticated simulations, and what we call non-buffered expatriate assignments. As an example, I remember years ago taking on a project with an agency in Mexico. And in my first trip, it was very much a strategic trip. And I was given lots of briefing about my client group that I'd be working with, and I was met at the airport with a driver and chauffeured to my hotel and to meetings, and I had someone at my elbow the entire time to make sure I understood what was going on in that context and who the players were and what was expected of me. Then I came back 3 months later, and I needed to frankly get off the plane, get to the hotel, get into the meetings. No one at my elbow. It was a non-buffered experience. It's the types of things we want to think about as we're growing these skills. I'm going to show you a video at this point in time of a global leader, and I want you to observe how he explains what he's learned and what he's doing. I think you'll find it very, very instructive.
We're joined by Colin Scone, you're president and CEO of two car companies, Renault and Nissan. You've just received the INSEAD 2008 Transcultural Leader Award. Congratulations on that. You really are something of a transcultural leader, though. You're Brazilian, Lebanese by descent, a Jesuit. We heard in this session from a Jesuit background. What is it that would make a good transcultural leader, in your opinion?
Obviously, the fact that you have been raised and born and your childhood, you visited many countries and you had this experience. Obviously, it's not by choice, it's just by coincidence because you're born in a family, helps a lot. You need also to have, I would say, more on the mindset side or character side, some empathy, which means that, you know, when you're moving from one country to the other, one culture to the other, there is curiosity about it, and there is a way to connect with and to learn from this new environment.
You were saying that people should love the country, respect it anyway.
But if you have to work, and particularly do something significant in a country, it's much easier if somehow you're connected to the country and you like the country and you respect the people and you're curious about the culture. It makes a big, big difference because, you know, people in the country working around you can notice this. And then when you notice that you are connected to the country, that you're happy to be here, that you're curious, that you're learning, that you're listening, well, they're going to forgive you a lot of things. Well, if not, you're going to be always facing scrutiny from people who consider that maybe you don't get it, maybe you have preconceived idea, maybe you're not listening.
What was your approach when you went to Japan? Because you have learned some things about the culture. You were telling a story about how you were told that you should go into the elevator first before women. You had been holding back before.
Well, you know, there are a lot of things which are very rational that you're going to learn immediately, like learn a new language, learn how to like the food, you know, learn how to drive in the street. But then there are things which are embedded in you, habits, intuitions, which are marked by your own culture. And you're going to have to get to these basic references and question them when you're living in a country which is very different from yours. The story of the elevator where, you know, if you're living in a Western country, it's very gross to get into the elevator in front of a woman, while in Japan, that's what is expected. And trying to do differently would in a certain way violate the code of Japanese culture is very interesting. But at the beginning, foreigners never do it because they consider that it's gross to do that. Well, until you understand that you're going to have to live in Japan like Japanese, and it's very different from if you were living in France or living in the United States. You're still fighting, struggling with your preconceived idea, and you're not opening up and accepting the country, the new country where you're living or you're working as it is.
Japan is very different, though. How did you adapt to Japan?
You know, again, I wanted to learn a lot from Japan. It was my first experience. It was a completely different culture. I didn't know a lot about Japan. So this mixture of curiosity, willing to learn, but at the same time wanting to make a contribution, wanting to, in a certain way, make a difference, helped me a lot. Obviously, I had the opportunity to be, going to Japan in order to help revive an icon of the Japanese industry. But at the same time, it was not only about the job to do. It was also a new culture to discover.
Do you try to have transcultural teams? I mean, I presume your boards are still very much based on the nationalities of whether it be Renault from France or Nissan from Japan.
You know, a passport is important, but it's not as important as experience. That means, so obviously, if you have different passport, you have different experience, and you have different culture. So I am by experience of the belief that when you have a very diverse team, people of different background, different culture, different gender, different age, you're going to get a more creative team, probably getting better solutions and enforcing them in very innovative way and with very limited number of preconceived ideas. So I'm totally convinced that the more diverse the team is, the better you understand the situation and the more you are creative about the solutions.
You were very interested in what you were saying about women. And
it's a fascinating video clip, and we can play more of it if you choose. I can send you the link to it. But I'm realizing I'm getting toward the end of my seminar, and I haven't offered you an opportunity to ask me questions. I have some pre-programmed in the presentation, but I'm going to open it up to the floor now and see what you folks have to ask of me. I look forward to hearing from you, and I understand that my facilitator is going to help me hear these quotes.
Thanks, Dr. Chris.
Your questions.
Interesting presentation. Folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either insert it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the console, so please click on it if you want to speak directly with the speaker. So let me go to the question box. There are a couple of questions already posted. The first one.
Yes.
How might these type of models be applied in your career development and or organization?
Very good. Great question. What you want to think about is you're almost like your own brand when you're moving into this role, and you want to think about, well, what do I know about myself and I don't know about myself? And once you get a baseline, you might say, do I really want this work? And if it's true, and say, for example, you are low on relationship building skills, it's just not your strength, you are naturally shy. Shy people can be very effective across difference, but you have to know that you want it. So you have to find ways to grow that. And what we've learned in this work is that it's done incrementally. So you're not going to become gregarious immediately, but you might practice meeting new people and stretching yourself on a regular basis, almost incrementally, step by step, so that, you know, by the time the role and the responsibility comes your way, you're pretty adept at meeting new people and working across differences and making those relationships. Organizationally, you want to think about how you are facilitating those opportunities for your up-and-coming leadership team. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there another question?
We have another one from Brother Amal Al-Khatani. The question is, let me see, okay, it's more on an individual basis. I feel like I have a lot of potential as a professional. However, I can't help but stress over everything and give things more effort than what they actually require. Prioritizing, I guess, is what my problem is. How can I fix this?
Very good. Here's what we know about growing competence. And stress is a big one. That's one of those predispositions that is harder to change, is that you make a change with with a competency, either by directly going at it, I want that, setting a goal, stair-stepping toward it, leveraging, or another way is to leverage a strength, something you do well, and learning from it, or you compensate for it. You realize you're not going to grow it, but you find ways around it. So under stress, you might say, I want to change how I deal with stress. And there may be ways for you to get a coach or a mentor to find out what the stressors are and to learn to understand them differently, to be less hard on yourself. You might want to use your strong self-identity or your natural curiosity to lead you into new situations, but recognize where you're at. There's a group that I work with who have a school called Personal Leadership, and it's all about understanding how you emotionally and physically respond to new situations, and can you recognize those? You know, in my case, I get cottonmouth. It's hard to believe someone who talks as much as I do gets cottonmouth, but I do. And do I recognize that all of a sudden that's my internal sign that I'm stressing and that I'm going to need to take a deep breath, get some tea, cope with stress differently. So recognize that I'm into it. So there's ways to go about addressing that, leveraging a strength, or in some cases compensating for it. There's certain things that can be stressors for you. I have some friends for whom food is a stressor. If they don't get the right food at the right time, it really throws them off. So they learn to travel or to indicate to their hosts, I need to be given these types of foods. I realize it's your cultural norm to offer me this, but it will make me ill. So please make sure I get these types of food. And it's okay to compensate for that, okay? But think about it as an incremental growth and look at what you have to address it, what you can leverage about yourself, and then if you need to compensate for something that really is not possible to grow. But it is possible to change stress management and stress levels. I've seen it done. It's going to take dedication, but you've got it.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just looking at the clock as we're pressed on time. So let me quickly take two more questions. One from brother Metwali Abdul Salam. The question is, key dimension of culture should be replaced by key dimensions of human interaction, because whatever our culture is, we should develop it to suit our human values. I think we consider the culture and nationality as kind of discrimination that should be stopped. It's more of a comment, so any further comments that you would like to give, Doctor?
I think it's a very profound perspective, and I appreciate it. Thank you for offering it. The thing we want to keep in mind about how we look at culture is that it is our sense of belongingness, and people do often respond negatively when they meet a difference that they don't understand. And so self-knowledge helps us understand our preference, and then these higher level of thinking helps us respond better, more appropriately. Rather than bad, it's, oh, different, new. And that's that human interaction piece that you're mentioning. I want to interrupt negative stereotypical behavior and reformulate it into positive engagement. What's highest and best here? Not, I don't like the way you engage that. And so these are the types of things I'm hoping to engage with these types of tools and perspectives. But ultimately, that improved engagement is exactly what we're working toward. And I thank you for clarifying that for me. In fact, the quote I just put up on the slide is exactly what I'm talking about.
All right, there's another one from Brother Usman Orakzai. The question is, Carlos Coulson indicated that expats have experience that should be valued, but usually in the Middle East, personal relationships are stronger. How should a balance be maintained?
What happens in a situation like this is that when one is expatriated in a situation such as the one that you mentioned, it's important that you don't lose the contacts, the relationships that you have in your homeland and your home culture. And so what you want to do is to make sure that you use the technology that's available to maintain those relationships so that when you do return, you're able to continue and leverage what you've gained through the new relationships and say, yes, I'm still your colleague. We've been working together for years. We have great respect for each other, but I'm bringing to you new relationships, new colleagues, people that we will be able to leverage for the benefit of our organization. So you're bringing a gift of new relationships. You haven't forgotten. What's the Girl Scouts, forgive me, it's cultural norm in the US, make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver and the other's gold. Silly little rhyme, but it works. All relationships are good.
Yeah, very nice to conclude at the rhyme you just shared, Doctor. So thank you very much. I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for taking the time to deliver this excellent webinar, especially I understand it's too early at your end. So once again, thank you very much. And any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
I want to thank them all. My contact information is here if you're interested in learning to use any of these perspective using tools. This is how you reach me. The staff of Madinah also knows how to reach me. I'd love to hear from you. And I wish you all well. Thank you all for your time this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world. It's been a great pleasure to work with you. Have a great day, great evening.
Thank you very much. And Philip, our mutual doctor. So once again, thank you very much. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it. Please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about our upcoming programs and webinars and to equally access the recorded version. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.